Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ann Albert. I am, as ever, the Klatt Family Director for Public Programs at the Herbert D. Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies here in Philadelphia at the University of Pennsylvania. And I am welcoming everyone to this final talk in our series on Jewish law and the US Constitution. This series, which has been running off and on since November, has intersected in various ways with this year's fellowship program at the Katz Center, which focused on modern Jewish legal culture more broadly, with the focus here being on Jewish legal contexts in the US. After this program today, we move on here at the Katz Center with our public programs to completing our programming year with 2 more talks on archaeology and ancient Jewish life. That series running with 1 talk in March and 1 in April, and then rounding out the year with a mini course taught by Professor Yonatan Brafman on Halacha in the modern world. And there is information about all of those programs on our website with registration open. In case you did miss earlier programs on Jewish life and US constitutional law in this series, the rest of those talks are now or will soon be on YouTube for you to rewatch and share and enjoy in perpetuity. And this program will join them in the coming days as well. As we begin today, as always, I sincerely thank the Klatt family and the Harry Stern Family Foundation, whose gifts made this programming possible. Also the Katz family and the rest of our board of advisors, and the many other donors who have supported the work of the center. In particular today, I also thank Roberta and Stanley Bogan and the Israel Institute, who provided particular support for this program. I also personally thank, as always, and especially at the end of a long series, all my colleagues here at the Katz Center who make things run and who we depend upon for everything. Diana Dennis-Walters, Brian Lipscomb, Miriam Saperstein, in particular on these Zoom lectures, but the staff and leaders of the center more broadly, of course, as well. In addition, I thank for the last time for a while, our partners at Penn's Carey Law School, who have worked with us to make these programs in the law series available for continuing legal education credit. So if you're here with the intention of receiving that credit, this is the time to listen carefully now. And if you're here not to receive credit, you can stop paying attention for just a moment. So to those who are here for CLE credit, note that the CLE passwords will be announced twice during this hour. You're asked to write down the passwords and enter them on your digital evaluation form after the event is over. These passwords will tell the facilitators how long you attended. The first password I'm going to announce now. The first password is parenthood. I'm meant to say that the evaluation form is mandatory to receive CLE credits. The link to the digital evaluation form was emailed to you in your confirmation email when you registered for CLE. If you didn't receive that email, you'll find the link to that form in the chat. And please also note that CLE credit registration is separate from the registration just to join the Zoom for today. So if you meant to register but didn't, or if you're just now finding out about that, it isn't too late. To get credit for this program, you can find links to the information you need on the event page on our website. Once again, that first password for CLE attendees is parenthood. As always, do submit questions anytime throughout the hour using the Q&A function in the bottom of your Zoom window. So just to clarify, not the chat, but the Q&A function. And if we have time remaining after our presentation, I'll moderate a discussion with the speaker. Now, to introduce today's speaker, as we turn to the topic of law and family life, particularly how Jewish legal decisors have responded to new conditions and conceptions of parenthood. Hi, I am very pleased this afternoon here in Philadelphia to present Avishalom Westreich. He's here at the Katz Center, just 1 floor below me right now, this semester as the Roberta and Stanley Bogan Visiting Scholar, as well as an Israel Institute Visiting Faculty Fellow here at Penn. Normally, when he doesn't get to be in Philadelphia, he's an associate professor of Jewish law, family law, and jurisprudence at the College of Law and Business in Ramat Gan, Israel, and a research fellow at the Kogod Research Center for Contemporary Jewish Thought at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. And I should add also that he has in the past held prestigious fellowships at Harvard and Brandeis and the University of Manchester. His research focuses on just what we'll be learning from him today, on modern family law, including marriage and divorce, which includes the aguna problem and more, as well as issues around reproduction. His publications include a recent book that is probably the most relevant thing to what you'll be learning today, and you may all want to check out, called Assisted Reproduction in Israel, Law, Religion, and Culture, that came out from Brill in 2018. And also a book called Talmud-Based Solutions to the Problem of the Aguna, about 10 years ago. He also studies the Talmudic laws of tort, and I should note that he has a book on the 4 archetypes of damages coming out, I think, this year from Carmel Publishing House. That one may be in Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken, but those of you who read Hebrew will enjoy. So, of course, Avishalom also publishes prolifically in research journals and teaches widely in the community, and we are lucky, very lucky to have him here to speak about this important and emergent topic in current law. And with that, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Anne, for the wonderful introduction and warm welcome. And hello, everyone. I'm very happy that you are here. We are going to talk today about, I think, one of the most fascinating topics within Jewish law in modern days, which is affected by dramatic cultural, social, scientific, legal, and many, many other developments. And this is the issue of how do we define parenthood. And we will see that there are a lot of aspects of this topic, and we'll try to touch as much as we can. But I want to start with a quick quiz, a quick survey, which I would ask you to fill in. You can access the quiz through the QR code that you see on your screen. Just use your camera and log into the quiz, or scan the QR code. Alternatively, you will be able to access the quiz through the link that will be sent on chat in a moment. So please, you can see it now on your chat. Please access, and I'll give you 1 minute just to give a short responses to this quiz. Base yourself on what you think is the reality, or what you think should be the reality according to the questions. If you watch this lecture on YouTube in the future, somehow, you are also very welcome to access the quiz and to respond. So let's wait about a minute and continue. Meanwhile, I'll explain the quiz for those of you who are trying to reply to that. The quiz is about how do you think we law, religious law, and what is your personal view regarding definitions of motherhood in cases of surrogacy and egg donations, cases in which we have multiple options for defining parenthood. And in those cases, there are different opinions. There is the people might think should be the definition of motherhood. We have the option of what law thinks that should be the definition of motherhood, and religious perspective. The quiz is of course anonymous, so we don't have to be afraid of giving any response that you think that is appropriate. Okay. Let's wait 30 seconds and continue. You can, of course, continue responding to the quiz during my talk if you wish, but we'll return to that at the end of the lecture. Okay, so let's start. And if you haven't finished yet, you are, as I said, you are welcome to continue, but we'll start our discussion. In fact, there are, as I said at the beginning, there are changes within society, scientific changes that challenge the way that we understand family. They challenge family structures. For example, social changes of family structure. We find new family structures like single-parent families. This is something that might have been also in the past, but today we have much more than that. Same-sex families, multi-parent families, and this is an ongoing discussion about the legitimacy of multi-parent families. So we have several options for new family structures. But it's not only social change or cultural change. It is also based on scientific change. Today, science provides us with options to treat differently to mother, father, and so on. The role of the mother is divided or might be divided by using assisted reproductive technologies. Father role is much more diminished. Father doesn't have to be part of the family or patriarch like in the past, but rather just to contribute his sperm. New forms of parenthood, which are much more complicated, like the three parents issue, which is based on mitochondrial donation, and much more than that. And there is kind of interplay between scientific changes and social changes. What leads to the other, whether the society leads to or pushes towards scientific change or vice versa. But the result is that we have today multiple forms of families, and I touched only a few of them. And technology provides us with the option to enhance those family forms into much more than we had in the past. Now, if we think about those changes from a conceptual perspective, it changes not only the structure of family, but also the way that we understand parenthood concepts. And this is something that I'm very interested in. When we talk, our talk today will go around the issue of parenthood definitions or parenthood concepts, since I think that through those conceptual changes, we can understand better the ideas behind the larger social, cultural, and alike changes. So if we start from the basis, let's say, in one word, we will not develop it more than that. When we think about classic families, we can think about what people might define in the past, and maybe in the present, this is a question of worldview, people might define as natural parenthood. Natural parenthood would be based on biological genetic connection between father and mother, and the definitions of father and mother would be based on those connections. But today, the discourse, and even without talking about the changes themselves, the discourse today has changed. And today we talk about other aspects of parenthood, other aspects that change the way that we define parenthood. For example, social parenthood, functional parenthood, psychological parenthood, contractual parenthood. Although definitions are relatives, and you can see that I define them as relatives because they are connected one to the other. They are connected in a way that they are not necessarily the biological definitions of parenthood, but rather parenthood that is based on the question who functions as a parent, who has the psychological connections to the children, and so on. Now, in the past, the institution of adoption was there, but today it's it is much larger, and we have a lot of options, as we saw at the beginning. Therefore, the question of parenthood definition became even crucial. Now, it's not only a question of how would we define parenthood, but rather it might lead to tensions and to contradictions or to conflict. If we think that psychological parenthood might have an effect, it means that it is possible that it will be in a contradiction with other forms of parenthood, and we need to solve those contradictions. Now, when we come to Jewish religious law, when we come to religious law in general, we need to ask ourselves, and this is the topic of today's lecture and today's discussion, and this is in general the topic of the whole series: how Jewish law responds to those changes. I just mentioned in a comment before getting into more details or into the specific cases which I would like to discuss, that when I speak about Jewish law, I refer to classic Jewish law, which usually is identified with the maybe Orthodox understanding of Jewish law, conservative understanding of Jewish law, the classic halakha, if you use the Hebrew term. And I'm speaking about this view of Jewish law. And in order to understand what are the responses or how Jewish law might respond to the question of parenthood concepts, we need to examine specific cases. And many times in Jewish law, this is typical to Jewish law analysis. Jewish law many times would not deal with the larger topics explicitly, but rather would try to get into specific cases. And we, as scholars, as people who try to understand Jewish law, would have to conclude from those specific cases to the more general and big question. So what we are going to do is to see three cases. We'll start from the easier one, which is parenthood definitions in classic assisted reproduction. And when I refer to classic assisted reproduction, I refer to artificial insemination, which became practiced at the beginning of the 20th century or at the last decades of the 20th century, in vitro fertilization, which are today are considered as the more, as I said, classic assisted reproduction procedures. And then we'll move to a more complicated question, not from scientific perspective, but rather from religious, philosophical, and more, which is the question of fatherhood definition in posthumous fertilization. And then we'll complete with discussing motherhood in surrogacy and egg donation, and by that we'll have the whole picture, hopefully. So let's start with a few words on parenthood definitions in classic assisted reproduction. As I said, this is the easier case. It wasn't easy all time. Sometimes it was more difficult, but today it is considered easier than in the past. I think many of us would ask, why is it so difficult? Why there is a question at all? What's the problem with the artificial insemination or with the in vitro fertilization? So the answer would be that many times religious law is more conservative and afraid of changes. And there are some challenges that might prevent religious law, and I'm talking about religious law in general, from approving new technologies. First of all, the good old slippery slope. The good old slippery slope is the fear that if you permit something, it might lead to much more difficult and complicated results. For example, if you even permit artificial insemination, it might lead to mixture of identities. It might lead to cases in which the sperm would not be the correct sperm of the husband. Of course, we talk about classic family structure, but that sperm might be changed. Or if you talk today about IVF, in vitro fertilization, we have the fear of swapping between fertilized ovum and so on. Now, those fears are not that irrational. We have stories from the past about hospitals, some of them Jewish hospitals, that the physicians were so ambitious to solve the problem of the couples that came to advise them, and they even became donors of their own sperm, the physicians, and used their own sperm in order to fertilize the over the women that came to solve their own problems. Now, of course, it was done without notifying the couple and led to many problems. So the fear of slippery slope is relevant fear, of course, from a religious perspective. The first commandment, first biblical commandment of be fruitful and multiply, it's also in question when we talk about parenthood in classic assisted reproductive technologies, because we don't know if this commandment is aimed to do things naturally, again, as they were understood in the past, or maybe the result is what we are interested in, natural parenthood concepts and the like. But on the other hand, throughout the years, there were different kinds of pressure on halachic decisors, on Jewish law decision makers to approve those practices. And the pressure could be cultural pressure, for example, the familial character of many Jewish communities, or pro-natalist view of many Jewish communities, historical pressure based on minority feelings, or even the historical trauma from of the Holocaust that led people to their feeling that they must do something in order to change their situation, the terrible situation that was created in the past. And the result was that despite the hesitations, assisted reproductive technology, the classic ones, were encouraged by Jewish law decisors and conceptualized. And when I say conceptualized, I refer to the fact that they agreed, many of them, if not most of them, agreed to define parenthood, or artificial or scientific parenthood, following medical procedure as a complete parenthood. And I want to provide you with two examples that would show you the way that Jewish law decision makers have thought about those challenges. For example, Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, this statement, very interesting statement, was made on posthumous fertilization, but it's relevant to our general discussion as well. So I bring it here. And he says that basically, if we don't have a real reason to forbid, the natural situation is to permit. And it's a very surprising statement, because Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg passed away a few years ago, but he was a Jerusalem scholar, a very old school one, although his decisions were many times innovative, but we could expect a different decision. And he says explicitly, I don't have any reason to forbid. And even more than that, there is a desire to leave a name and remembrance in the world, so that the general attitude would be toward leniency, or toward approval those technologies. Even more interesting case is the case of Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch. Moshe Sternbuch is considered as a very, very strict, ultra-orthodox decision maker, who at the beginning was very hesitating regarding the use of assisted reproductive technologies. He said, in the 90s, he said, I don't really agree with that, but if you want to get an approval, go and ask someone else, which is very interesting by itself. But what is more interesting is the change that happened to his thought throughout the years. And later, about 10 years ago, on 2013 or 14, he said, when I saw that the practice of IVF has spread, now pay attention, he refers here to the practice of the community. So the practice of the community led him to change his mind. So when I saw that the practice has spread, I changed my mind. And now I think that a child born through IVF is surely considered as the child of the sperm owner and so on. So as we said, we see here, but then a kind of amendment to the way that fatherhood, in the case of artificial insemination, or fatherhood and motherhood in the case of IVF, where they were defined as following the medical procedure rather than the classic way of reaching fatherhood and motherhood. This is the first step. And we want to continue to our next step, which is a little bit more complicated. And it is complicated not because the procedure is more complicated. Posthumous reproduction is not that complicated procedure. Of course, if someone provides sperm or ova and then passed away, their gametes would be, it's possible to use them. But even in cases of tragic death, and there were a few cases that I'll mention in a minute, even in cases of tragic death, there is possibility regarding sperm to extract sperm from the dead body in the first hours after death, and then to use them if there is a need, or if someone wishes to use them. But the question here is not from the technological perspective, but rather from different perspectives, like the ethical perspective. Can we consider this option as ethical, to use someone's sperm or gametes or ova after the death? Legal perspective, the child that would be born after posthumous fertilization, would the child have property or any other children rights, like the right to inherit his or her parents and so on? Of course, religious questions of the use or the how we treat the dead body, and other kind of religious considerations, psychological and social considerations of being born to someone who already passed away, and philosophical challenges, philosophical questions of how we deal with the life-death dichotomy. So the questions here are great questions. Again, not from the medical perspective, but rather from the more wider sociological, religious, and so on perspectives. And in Israel, there were quite a few cases, again, tragic cases of soldiers who passed away, and one in an accident, and another in exercise. And their parents wanted to use their sperm. In one case that you see here, the widow refused, and it came to court. It was a long process, but finally the court decided that unless there is an explicit or almost explicit agreement of that person, which many times in tragic cases of death we don't have, so unless we have that agreement, it would be prohibited. This is one case, Shaked Meiri, and the other case, Omri Shachar. At the beginning, the court agreed, but then Supreme Court decided that we need an explicit agreement, so that the parents would not be provided with the right to use their deceased son's sperm in order to maybe to make kind of donation, or to use it with known surrogate mother. So it is very challenging and difficult and tragic question, and it is difficult also from religious perspectives. Jewish law usually is a legal and formal legal system that many times asks whether something is permitted or prohibited. The binary distinction between permissive and prohibitive things. But it's not only that, it's also a question of, let's say, the values that behind those decisions. Is it encouraged? And what about the rights that the religious rights that are bound to deciding if it is permitted or not permitted? And what's interesting here, or even additional thing that is interesting here in the case of posthumous fertilization is some ritual implications. According to Jewish law, I give the second example of levirate marriage. According to Jewish law, if a man dies childless, his wife needs to go through a process of, in the past it was levirate marriage, today it's mostly a ritual act of chalitza that would allow her, from a religious perspective, to remarry. And this is called chalitza or ibum in Hebrew, levirate marriage. Now think about the following option. If someone dies childless, and then after a year or something like that, his widow, his ex-wife or past wife became pregnant from their child, from his sperm. Now, is it considered from halachic, from Jewish law perspective, as that person's child? And what can we say about the obligation to go through a process of chalitza? Would she be exempted from the process of chalitza based on giving birth to that child? In general, Jewish law, I think that a few letters and decisions that were made from Jewish law perspective, the general view will be that formally it is permitted, but it's not encouraged. It's not encouraged since there are psychological and other kinds of problems, and the application of that will be there are different applications to different Jewish law realms. So that, and I'll explain this point, which is a little bit complicated. So, for the purpose of, for example, of retroactively fulfilling the commandment of being fruitful and multiply, according to many writers, maybe that this person has fulfilled his obligation to be fruitful and multiply by giving birth to a child after his death. But as regards the levirate marriage obligation or chalitza obligation, that child would not be considered as that person's child. And that means that we have here different or even multiple fatherhood definitions. If we take the bottom line is that for the purpose of being fruitful and multiple, and maybe for the purpose of inheritance law, that child would be considered the child of the deceased. That is, that the person is the father. But for the purpose of levirate marriage, he is not considered the father. It makes fatherhood definition much more complicated. So we started with the first case in which we saw that parenthood definitions are changed as a response to social pressure and to scientific developments. We now saw that fatherhood definitions are changed, and we saw the flexibility of fatherhood definition and the fact that there are optional multiple definitions of fatherhood even in one single case. And now we would like to move to the third test case, which is motherhood definitions in surrogacy and egg donation. And we'll move to this question, which is relevant to what you have, what I asked you at the beginning in our quiz. Sorry, in a quiz. Sorry, just one moment. I had a problem with my slides, which will be solved in a second. Apologize for that. Okay. So the first quiz. Okay, in our quiz, we discussed the definition of motherhood in surrogacy and egg donation, and let me elaborate this point a little bit further. Now, when we take the cases of surrogacy or egg donation, we can divide the optional parents, or especially optional mothers, into different kinds of mothers. First, the biological mother. Now, the problem is, or the difficulty is, that even when we talk about a biological mother, we have several options. We have, in fact, two options. Maybe in the mitochondrial replacement, we'll have three, but in the regular case, we have two optional mothers. The first one is the physical mother, the mother who gave birth to the child, which might be a surrogate mother. It depends on the agreement between the parties. And the second one is the genetic mother, the mother who contributed her egg. Now, I want to explain the difference between surrogacy and egg donation. From medical perspective, regarding the technology, it's the same technology. When we do surrogacy and egg donation, we do similar process, which means that one woman contributes her egg, one woman is practiced as the carrying mother, the mother who gives birth to the child, so that that child might have possibly two biological mothers, physical and genetic. The difference is based on the agreement between the parties. If it is an agreement of egg donation, that is, the egg owner donates her egg to the intended mother, so that it will be defined as egg donation, and the intended mother would be the carrying mother, the mother who gave birth to the child. Of course, there is an option of the third mother. We won't mention it here. On the other hand, if the donor here is the mother who gives birth to the child, that will be defined as a case of surrogacy, and the intended mother might be the genetic mother. So the difference between surrogacy and egg donation, I hope I didn't confuse you, but basically the difference between surrogacy and egg donation is a difference in the intention of the parties, which is more legal difference rather than technological difference. From biological perspective, we have the birth mother and the genetic mother, and both might be defined as mothers. But we have here another elements, which are the social elements that we mentioned at the beginning, functional, psychological, or contractual elements, and you have here multiple, again, even before we deal with Jewish law, we have here multiple options of motherhood. What I would like us to do now is to ask whether it is possible to find also in Jewish law multiple parenthood definitions. Now we saw it when we spoke about fatherhood in posthumous fertilization, but here we will find it in much stronger way. So let's see. What is the dilemma from Jewish law perspective? When I mentioned earlier the confusing distinction between egg donation and surrogacy and the biological facts there, I did it because usually Jewish law would look for the substantial definition of parenthood. It would not define parenthood usually according to contractual agreements, but rather according to biological facts. But the problem is that here we have two optional mothers, even from biological perspective, the carrying one, the physical one, and the egg owner, the genetic mother. So Jewish law decision makers had to find solution, but the problem is that there are no sources. Classic sources did not deal explicitly with this kind of question. So creative solutions has to be done, creative from a hermeneutic perspective, for example, by making very interesting analogies to other religious law areas like laws related to botany and the like, comparing it with the discussion around religious affiliation that might affect the way of defining mothers, or even non-legal sources, which are called agadic sources, non-legal sources that some decisors thought that it would be helpful to conclude from those discussions about the definition of motherhood. For example, the story about Rachel and Joseph and Dinah, the daughter of Leah, that according to some later midrashim, the child was changed between Leah and Rachel, so that we can conclude from that story about the way that we define motherhood. So our different sources, and the bottom line is that there is no decisive conclusion, no decisive answer. And what we view among halachic decisors, if we review our discussions throughout, let's say, 30 years, we can see kind of that pendulum. Change from physical parenthood to genetic parenthood and vice versa. At the beginning, most decisors prefer the physical option, then they move to genetic option. And today, I think it's going a little bit to the other option. The bottom line is that we have here a doubt. We don't have an answer from Jewish law perspective about who is the mother. Now, doubt might be a response which would not lead to any kind of an act, but many times, and this is what I want us to see in a moment, many times doubt might create also opportunities. So, as we've said, the pendulum within Jewish law discourse is between, at the beginning, 4 options: the genetic mother, birth mother, both or none. But today, I think there are 3 options that are still relevant. Today, or at least at the beginning, it was the birth mother, then it moved to genetic mother. Today, it's a little bit going back to the birth mother. Some would say that both, but finally, as we said, there is a doubt. And a doubt leads to dual motherhood, what might be defined as dual motherhood, or two different definitions of motherhood, which would take place together. And the fact that there is doubt, or there are different kind of definitions together, has some positive results and negative results. For example, the very existence of doubt is by itself might be considered as something that is not so good. A religious affiliation might be problematic if we don't have a decisive response of who is the mother of the child, dual identity of the child. But it might have also positive effects, like practical flexibility, that if we have 2 options, maybe if we need to be flexible, we'll be able to choose between those options, reducing institutional conflicts or reducing conflicts between Jewish law and civil law. So we are moving between negative and positive outcomes of not having decisive answer as to the definition, the definition of mother. The very existence of a doubt, at the beginning I said that it is a negative thing, but it can be also a positive thing because it might lead us to flexibility or to find creative solutions. And I want to discuss, and by this to conclude our discussion, I want to discuss a very interesting case that occurred in Israel a couple of months ago, and in fact is still continuing, still in process, which might be like a kind of modern King Solomon judgment, the famous one. On September 2022, it was found out that in one hospital in Israel, Asuta Hospital in Rishon LeZion, there was a very difficult case, even tragic case of embryo swap. A couple that went through a process of IVF had a child, baby girl, and that baby girl needed some medical treatment, and in that medical treatment, which in fact put the mother in life danger. In that medical treatment, it was found out that the child is not genetically the child of that couple, and every couple that went through the process of IVF at the same time or close to that time became in very, very crazy situation because they didn't know. Maybe it's their own child. Maybe the girl is their own girl. Sorry. And what happened is that the tension between the genetic and physical mothers became explicit in this case and became even unsolved. Because in regular case of surrogacy and egg donation, there is an agreement between the parties. So the surrogate is surrogate mother by her agreement. And similarly, the egg donor, if it's a case of an egg donation. But here, the carrying mother became kind of a surrogate mother without previous agreement, and she wanted to continue holding the child. And similarly, the optional genetic mothers, which were not yet found out. It is discussed in court. There were a few decisions. Basically, the current situation is that the birth mother and the intended father are holding the child, which was born. It's a baby girl, and they are de facto parents, but it's still under discussion. And optional parents have the right to go through a process of genetic tests. And if someone would be found as the genetic mother and father, we still don't know what the court would decide. But what Jewish law can say about these kind of cases? If we had a decisive decision of who is considered as the mother, the genetic one or the physical one, we could solve this problem very easily. We can say, from a Jewish law perspective, again, it's not a Jewish law case, it's a case that is discussed in family court, in civil family court, but from Jewish law perspective, we could say that if the genetic mother is the mother, so the child should be the child of that mother. And if Jewish law had decided that the carrying mother is the mother, we could say that the mother is the mother who gave birth to that child. But as we saw, we don't have a decisive answer. And in fact, we have a doubt. And I suggest that this doubt might lead us to add another kinds of considerations from Jewish law perspective. I would like to remind you the old biblical known story of King Solomon's judgment. Two women who came in front of King Solomon. One of them, they both had children. One died, the other is alive. One of them argues that the live children is her child, her son, and the other argues the same. When I arose and she explains the first one, when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, it was not the son I had born. And the other one says similarly, the living child is my child. And King Solomon made a very, very interesting judgment. And the king said, so the king gave the order, fetch me a sword. And a sword was brought to the king. And then he said, cut the live child in two and give half to the one and half to the other. And what I'm sure everyone knows, that the real mother, the mother of the real child, said to the king, please, my lord, she cried, give her the live child, only don't kill it. The other said, it shall be neither yours nor mine, cut it in two. And the King Solomon decided that give the live child her, to the one who agreed to give it to the other woman, and do not put it to death. she is its mother. So these kind of cases, of course, it's almost irrelevant today. We have genetic tests, but we do conclude from this biblical story that feelings, emotional feelings, and maybe functioning as a mother might be relevant from Jewish law perspective as well. So, so the fact that the mother puts her life in risk, the fact that the mother, the birth mother, is the de facto parent, the fact that she is psychologically connected to the child, since we have a doubt, that might be relevant consideration. And I would like to suggest, and I suggested it in a forthcoming article in Hebrew in the Asia Journal, that since we have a doubt in parenthood definitions, that doubt might lead to using other arguments in order to define mother. I would like to conclude that what we have seen, we analyzed 3 cases. We saw the flexibility of motherhood definitions. We saw the way the Jewish law responds to modern challenges. And I hope you share this feeling with me, that there are fascinating processes within Jewish law that is not sticked into one definition of parenthood, but rather gives us multiple options. To sum up, I would like to ask you to test yourself again. It's the same test, and answer the following quiz, which will be a link will be sent in chat, and we'll have a few minutes to Q&A, and then I might show you the results. I might show you your responses and compare between what you thought at the beginning and what you're thinking. Thank you very much. Again, you are very welcome to access the quiz, to respond, and hope you had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avishalom. Let me just suggest that you stop the share so that we can see each other a little bit better. Wonderful. So before we start with Q&A, I just quickly want to give the second password for the folks who are seeking CLE credit. The second password for this program is family. Okay, so I have some questions, and the first one that I wanted to ask is if you could get a little bit into how the Jewish law perspective or Jewish law decisions are related to Israeli civil laws on the issue. I know you've worked on the connection of Jewish law and civil law in Israel. So I know we only have 5 minutes, but on one foot, can you talk a little bit about how those two things interact in the Israeli system?
Yeah, okay, so it's really great question. I would say I will try to give a very short answer. There are areas in family law which Israeli law must follow religious law. And for Jews, it will be Jewish law. And this is mainly marriage and divorce. And some other issues related to marriage and divorce, for example, maintenance, child support. Now, as regards parenthood definitions, in principle, it is a civil issue. So that family courts, it would be discussed in family court, and family court is not obliged to follow religious law. However, it would take into consideration the religious perspective. So that we'll find discussions of Jewish law in this kind of cases. More than that, if it's a case of religious affiliation, it's a case that is under the jurisdiction of religious law. So that in case of surrogacy, when we need to deal with defining who is the parent, that will be that in family court. But if it's a question of what is the religious affiliation of that child, that will be that in Jewish law court. And then, of course, the discussion will be entirely Jewish law discussion. So I hope I provided an answer to really, really difficult question.
Yeah, it's a really complicated question, which you answered in 1 minute, which is fantastic. I think the follow-up question, which came from the audience here, is if you see any changes that might take place to this area of Israeli law with the proposed changes to the legal system that are happening right now, if that's something that would be affected in ways that you can predict.
The planned or discussed judicial revolution today touches mainly constitutional aspects. For example, override clause and the constitutional and the committees that appoint judges and so on. There is some aspect of this revolution as regards jurisdiction of Jewish law courts, especially to provide them with the jurisdiction or maybe with the authority to become arbitrators in monetary cases. As regards surrogacy and egg donation, I don't expect any changes in the near future, although, we always might be surprised. But basically, it's not, as far as I know, under discussion now.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to ask whether we could return for a moment. I know now we're really down to a very small amount of time. Return to a moment to the slide where you alluded to some creative solutions in Jewish legal approaches, right? You said comparisons to botany, comparisons to religious affiliation, and Agadah. And of course, we don't have time for all of that, but could you bring maybe one or two interesting particular examples of the kinds of comparisons that are made in Jewish legal treatments?
Yeah, so this is the slide that you referred to. For example, botany regarding case of putting together two plants and the question of how we consider the tree that came from that. Sorry, I don't have the exact words in English. It's too specific.
Yeah.
And the story that I refer to, it's a fascinating story. So I'll mention it there. If you are familiar with the biblical story of the wives of Jacob, Rachel and Leah, according to that story, Leah had children, but Rachel did not have any children, and she prayed and so on. Now, the Torah tells us about Dinah, about the baby girl that Leah gave birth to, which was named Dinah, and then Rachel is described as giving birth to Yosef, Joseph. Now, the Midrash, it led the Midrash to create kind of interesting story, and there are different versions of that story. One version is that at the beginning, Leah had a baby boy, but she prayed, and that boy, the gender of that boy changed from boy to a girl, which is interesting by itself. Now, another version of that story is that both Leah and Rachel were pregnant at the same time. And following that prayer of Leah, the embryos swapped in Rachel and Leah. So the embryo that at the beginning, the boy that at the beginning was in Leah, when with Leah came Rachel's child, and the girl that Rachel had was moved to Leah. Now Rachel gave birth to a genetic child of Leah, which it means that she was kind of surrogate mother. So some said, okay, you have here an example of a surrogate mother, and of course Joseph is considered as the son of Rachel. It's fascinating example, fascinating proof, but it doesn't have any real legal weight. Not based a legal decision on this Agadic source, but I think it's a good example for this kind of analogies, which are very, very interesting analogies. And there are analogies from a religious affiliation. If someone converted when she's pregnant, what is what is the affiliation of the children? And this was compared as well to surrogacy, because at the beginning it was before conversion and after conversion, and this is the kind of comparison that we have.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I do have to let you go now. I want to just point out there is another question from the audience about asking for specific references for the halachic decisions or discussion of them. And I imagine that that would be a good thing to look in your recent book for. So if people want to learn
Yeah,
more.
you are very welcome. Maybe I would like just to share with you the quiz that we just did. And you can see, we don't have time to analyze your responses, but you can see the differences between the first one and the second one. We have more answers to the first one, but the second one at the left, you see that there are a few changes in the way that, for example, that Jewish law was understood as defining motherhood, and similarly, the way that civil law understands motherhood. So thank you for participating in this quiz. And as I said, you are very welcome to continue and responding to the quiz based on the codes that I've shared with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Avishalom. And thank you so much to everybody who is here learning with us. We hope to see you again in another program soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. And thank you, everyone.